The small-town courtroom hummed with anticipation, a quiet energy that felt almost tangible. Sunlight streamed in through tall, arched windows, casting warm streaks across the polished wooden benches. Outside, a soft October breeze rustled fallen leaves against the courthouse steps, hinting at the changing season. Inside, though, the room was thick with tension. Families whispered nervously to one another, adjusting their clothes and checking watches. Reporters clutched notebooks and cameras, scanning for the first sign of action. Police officers in crisp uniforms stood along the perimeter, their faces taut with professionalism, their eyes constantly shifting between the crowd and the judge's bench. Among the spectators sat a tiny girl, no more than 3 years old. She was barely visible next to her mother, who had cradled her close, one arm wrapped protectively around her daughter's small frame. The child clutched a stuffed bear tightly, its fur worn soft from constant affection. She rocked slightly in her mother's lap, humming under her breath, as though the familiar presence of her toy was the only anchor in a room that was intimidating even to adults. Her wide brown eyes scanned the courtroom, curious but unafraid, and followed the movement of the people around her with the precision of someone far older than her age. At the front of the room, near the judge's bench, stood Rex. He was a large, golden-coated police dog with alert eyes and a calm, steady presence. His size alone commanded attention, and his disciplined demeanor spoke to years of training. But there was something softer in his gaze, a gentle intelligence that seemed to understand more than just commands. Children, even toddlers, often felt a magnetic pull toward him. Today, Rex had been brought into the courtroom not as an enforcer, but as part of a community initiative to demonstrate the bond between children and police animals, to teach trust, and perhaps to offer reassurance in an environment that could feel cold and impersonal. The judge entered the courtroom with the measured steps of someone who had presided over thousands of hearings. Yet even his eyes lingered for a moment on the small girl, and Rex. His gavel tapped once against the wooden surface, a sharp note that silenced the room instantly. "Court is now in session," he intoned, his voice carrying authority, but also a hint of warmth. Lawyers shuffled papers, adjusting their suits, while the spectators straightened in their seats. Everything seemed routine, almost mundane, until the toddler shifted slightly and pointed toward Rex, her small finger trembling ever so slightly. Her mother noticed and leaned closer, whispering a soft, protective reminder. "Stay close, baby," she murmured, her voice tinged with worry. But the child simply blinked, her expression focused, almost as if she were making a silent decision that the adult world could not yet understand. She wriggled from her mother's lap and started to crawl toward Rex, slow and deliberate. Each movement was deliberate, not hurried, but purposeful, as though she knew instinctively that her destination mattered more than anything else in the courtroom. The officer handling Rex froze for a moment. Children were unpredictable, especially in a place like this, and the officer had learned to anticipate sudden movements. But something about this child's calm confidence made him hesitate. Instead of stepping forward to stop her, he knelt down slightly, giving her the space she seemed to need. "Easy there, little one," he said gently, his hand extended to guide her if necessary. Rex remained perfectly still, his head tilting slightly as he followed the child's approach, his tail wagging ever so subtly. The connection between them seemed almost instantaneous, a silent understanding that defied logic. Spectators in the courtroom began to notice. Whispered murmurs spread like wildfire. "Look at her. She's not afraid. Do you see how he's looking at her? That dog seems different around her." The adults were puzzled, even a little unsettled, by the ease with which a toddler moved toward a large, imposing police dog. But there was no danger in her approach, only a raw, unfiltered curiosity, and a kind of bravery that could make grown men pause. The air in the courtroom shifted. Legal arguments, case notes, and procedural formalities faded into the background. All eyes were drawn to the small girl and Rex, to the unspoken dialogue forming between them. Even the judge, who had seen decades of trials unfold, couldn't help but watch. There was a magnetic tension, not one of fear, but of anticipation. Something unexplainable was about to happen, and everyone instinctively knew it. The mother, though nervous, smiled faintly, a mix of pride and trepidation. She had never seen her daughter approach anyone or anything with such certainty. There was no hesitation, no doubt. It was as if the girl understood something profound about Rex, something that transcended words. The stuffed bear in her other hand seemed suddenly less important. Her focus was entirely on the dog. She knelt down in front of him, her tiny knees pressing lightly against the cold courtroom floor. For a few seconds, the world held its breath. The sounds of shuffling papers, whispered conversations, and the distant hum of fluorescent lights faded into silence. It was just the girl and Rex, two beings of vastly different sizes and experiences, communicating in a language that no one else could fully understand. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Cameras clicked softly, and even the officers, trained to maintain order and focus, felt an inexplicable pause in the rhythm of their duties. Then, the toddler opened her mouth, and the first words slipped out, simple but filled with clarity. "Find the bad man, Rex." The statement was direct, commanding even yet innocent in its tone. The courtroom froze entirely. Judges, lawyers, reporters, and officers alike felt the weight of those words. A 3-year-old had just spoken with the confidence of someone twice her age, and the fact that she directed her words to a police dog made it all the more surreal. For a moment, no one moved. Time seemed suspended. The judge rested his hand on the gavel, unsure whether to proceed. The officers exchanged quick, astonished glances. Reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture the moment. Even the mother could not suppress a gasp, her fingers gripping her child's arm with both fear and awe. And Rex? He wagged his tail slightly, his golden eyes meeting hers with an almost human understanding. He had heard her words, and though he could not speak, his response, a soft nudge of his head forward, was unmistakable. He understood. In that instant, the courtroom became something more than a space for legal matters. It became a place where innocence met authority, where bravery was measured not by years, but by the purity of intent. Every person present was touched, whether consciously or subconsciously, by the simple yet profound connection unfolding before them. A toddler and a dog, facing an unseen world of challenges, seemed to hold the entire room captive with nothing more than trust and courage. The moment lingered. People adjusted in their seats, hearts racing with a mix of awe and disbelief. The room that had begun the day filled with whispers and paperwork was now transformed into something extraordinary, a testament to the unspoken power of innocence, bravery, and the unique bond between human and animal. The stage was set, and though no one could predict what would happen next, one truth was clear. This tiny girl and her golden companion were about to leave an indelible mark on everyone in the courtroom. The courtroom remained suspended in that extraordinary moment. Every eye was drawn to the small girl kneeling before Rex, her wide brown eyes locked onto the dog's golden gaze. The murmurs had quieted, replaced by an almost reverent silence. It was as though the air itself had changed, thick with anticipation, waiting to see what this tiny being, no older than 3, would do next. Even the usually unflappable judge leaned slightly forward, resting his hands on the bench, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. He had seen hundreds of cases, but nothing like this. The mother, seated in the front row, kept a gentle hand hovering near her daughter's shoulder. She felt a mixture of pride, anxiety, and amazement. Her daughter, whom she often worried was too young to understand the world around her, displayed a fearlessness that defied her age. The soft hum of fluorescent lights above seemed to fade as the girl extended a tiny hand toward Rex. The dog, trained for patience and discipline, responded instinctively, lowering his massive head and allowing her touch. A subtle wag of his tail signaled a silent acknowledgement. He recognized her presence, her intent, and perhaps even the courage behind her gaze. As the toddler shifted closer, crawling over the polished wooden floor with tiny, deliberate movements, whispers rippled through the courtroom. "Isn't that dangerous?" One spectator whispered. "She's so small, and he's so big. Look at the way he's watching her. It's like he understands her." Another replied, voice tinged with awe. Even among the seasoned officers, murmurs of astonishment circulated. Police dogs were trained for control and obedience, and they often intimidated even grown men. Yet Rex exhibited patience and understanding that defied expectation, responding not to commands, but to the quiet presence of a tiny child. The child finally reached the large dog and paused for a moment, her tiny fingers brushing against his thick, golden fur. She did not flinch, nor did she make a sound of fear. Instead, she leaned closer, her lips barely a few inches from Rex's nose, and whispered something no one else could hear. It was a moment suspended in time. The courtroom collectively leaned in, straining to catch any sound, any word that might explain the uncanny bond forming before their eyes. The officer handling Rex knelt down beside the girl, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "Are you okay, little one?" he asked softly. His voice was calm, non-threatening, a stark contrast to the usual commanding tones he used during police demonstrations. The toddler looked up at him, her gaze unwavering, and nodded. Her small chin lifted with an air of certainty. She didn't need reassurance. She exuded confidence. "Rex," she said, her voice clear and deliberate, "find the bad man for Mommy." The words struck the courtroom like a bolt of lightning. A ripple of shock passed through the audience. The judge froze mid-note, gavel hovering in mid-air. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, pens hovering above notebooks. Reporters' fingers stilled over cameras. Even the mother gasped, unable to hide her emotions. The sheer audacity and clarity of the toddler's statement stunned everyone present. Here was a child who had spoken in a manner that combined innocence with unwavering bravery, addressing a trained police dog with the expectation of action. For a few seconds, the entire courtroom was silent. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally. The usual sounds of whispers, footsteps, and shuffling papers faded into the background, leaving only the girl and the dog. It was a silent dialogue, communicated through a mixture of words, glances, and gestures. Rex lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging her words, his large eyes steady and calm. The subtle wag of his tail seemed deliberate, almost as though he understood the gravity of the moment. The audience, fully aware of the unusual scene, remained frozen, caught between disbelief and fascination. The mother, trying to mask her tears, reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing the toddler's shoulder. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Be careful." But the child ignored the warning, her attention entirely on Rex. There was a seriousness in her expression that no adult in the courtroom could deny. She leaned forward, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone, as though communicating in a secret language. Her words, though simple, carried weight far beyond her years. "Find the bad man, Rex. Keep Mommy safe." The judge, who had prided himself on maintaining order and professionalism for decades, felt his heart stir in ways he hadn't experienced in years. He glanced around the room, seeing officers with their hands on their faces, reporters frozen mid-gesture, and families leaning forward with curiosity and concern. This was no longer just a courtroom proceeding. It had become something more profound, a human story unfolding in real time, revealing courage, trust, and innocence in a way that transcended legal formalities. Even the officers, trained to respond to chaos and danger, were caught off guard. They whispered among themselves, exchanging astonished glances. "I've never seen anything like this," one murmured. "The kid, she's fearless." Another nodded, his eyes still fixed on the girl. "And he's responding. He's actually responding to her." The realization spread quickly. The connection between a 3-year-old and a police dog was more powerful than anyone could have imagined. A bond that could communicate understanding without words or training. The courtroom, filled with the hum of anticipation, seemed to collectively hold its breath. People leaned closer, cameras clicked softly, and whispers of amazement circulated. The little girl, oblivious to the attention, continued her quiet interaction with Rex. She touched his fur gently, stroked his muzzle, and whispered instructions as if she were the captain of a ship. And Rex was her steadfast first mate. There was no fear, no hesitation, only trust and determination, qualities often reserved for those much older than her tender age. As the minutes passed, the audience's fascination grew. The tiny child had stolen the focus of the courtroom, drawing attention away from the case itself. Even the lawyers, who had spent weeks preparing their arguments, now found their eyes glued to this unexpected scene. The room was silent, except for the soft whispers between the girl and Rex, the subtle brush of her fingers against his fur, and the gentle wag of his tail. It was a moment of pure human connection, a rare glimpse of courage and innocence, intertwining in a way that no one had anticipated. The mother, finally finding her voice, leaned forward and whispered words of encouragement. "Rex will listen, sweetheart, but remember to be gentle." The child nodded, not taking her eyes off the dog. Her expression conveyed understanding beyond her years, a sense of purpose and determination that transcended her age. She had chosen to act, to communicate, and to trust, and in doing so, she had captivated every adult in the room. Then, as if on cue, Rex responded. He nudged her hand gently with his snout, a silent affirmation that he had heard her words, that he understood her intentions, and that he would act if needed. The audience erupted into a mix of gasps, whispers, and soft murmurs of admiration. The girl had not only approached a massive police dog alone, but had communicated in a way that elicited a response, a reaction that confirmed the extraordinary nature of their connection. At that moment, the courtroom became something larger than itself. It was no longer merely a space for legal proceedings. It was a testament to courage, trust, and the power of communication between beings who understood each other without words. Everyone present, from the judge to the reporters to the officers, felt the emotional impact. They were witnesses to something rare, a reminder that bravery and understanding could manifest in even the smallest individuals. The toddler, sensing the attention, remained calm and composed. She had accomplished something remarkable, yet she acted as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Her wide eyes scanned Rex's, her lips forming words only the dog could fully comprehend. The audience leaned forward, captivated, hearts racing in anticipation of what might happen next. For the first time that day, the courtroom seemed suspended in a space between reality and something almost magical, a moment of pure connection that defied explanation. And in that quiet, extraordinary silence, the story truly began to unfold. The courtroom remained frozen, its usual rhythm replaced by the electric tension of an unfolding miracle. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the small girl kneeling before Rex, the massive police dog who now seemed almost gentle, like a guardian rather than a trained enforcer. Spectators leaned forward, unsure if they were witnessing innocence, bravery, or something entirely inexplicable. Lawyers held pens mid-air, Officers remained rooted to the floor, and even the judge, whose voice normally commanded authority, paused mid-sentence, as though recognizing the unprecedented nature of the scene before him. The toddler's wide brown eyes locked with Rex's golden gaze. She adjusted the stuffed bear tucked under her arm, ensuring it remained close, a silent signal of comfort, a reminder of safety in a world that suddenly felt enormous and unpredictable. Then, as if gathering courage from an unseen source, she spoke. Her voice was clear, deliberate, and confident, cutting through the hushed whispers of the courtroom, like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. "Find the bad man, Rex," she said, her tone carrying authority far beyond her 3 years. A collective gasp swept through the room. The words, simple yet powerful, froze everyone in place. The judge's gavel hovered mid-air, unsure if he should intervene. Lawyers glanced at one another, eyes wide, their prepared speeches forgotten. Reporters instinctively raised cameras and leaned forward, fingers trembling as they scribbled notes that might never capture the gravity of the moment. And the mother, clutching the arms of her chair, felt her heart skip in both pride and fear. Her child, so small, so young, had spoken with an audacity and clarity that riveted every adult present. The officer kneeling beside Rex exhaled slowly, his professional composure wavering. Police dogs were trained for obedience and to detect danger, but they were not expected to interact with a toddler in this kind of manner. Yet Rex's response was subtle and immediate. His massive head dipped slightly, ears flicked forward, and his eyes never left the child. He emitted a soft, almost inaudible huff, an acknowledgement that sent a shiver down the spines of those watching. This was not fear or unpredictability, it was understanding. The spectators began to murmur softly, voices tinged with awe. "Did she just?" One whispered. "She actually spoke to him." Another replied, unable to hide the astonishment. Children in the courtroom watched with wide-eyed curiosity, and even adults found themselves holding their breath. Something remarkable was happening. The innocence of a 3-year-old was holding the attention of a room full of grown men and women, and even the law itself seemed to pause in recognition. The mother, sensing the moment's gravity, whispered a quiet caution. "Sweetheart, be careful," she said, her voice trembling slightly. But the child didn't flinch. Her tiny shoulders squared, and she spoke again, louder this time, as though affirming a command to her loyal companion. "Rex, protect Mommy. Find him. Make sure he can't hurt anyone." Rex responded immediately, not with aggression, but with a gentle, deliberate movement. He nudged the girl's hand lightly with his snout, a gesture so subtle, yet so filled with intent, that everyone in the courtroom felt its meaning. The dog was acknowledging her words, understanding the seriousness of her request, and communicating his own willingness to act. The spectators exchanged astonished glances, realizing they were witnessing a rare and almost mystical connection between a child and a service animal. The judge leaned forward on his bench, his usually impassive face betraying a flicker of wonder. He cleared his throat, struggling to maintain the formal composure demanded by the courtroom. "Order, order," he murmured softly, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Even he could not ignore the extraordinary scene. For a fleeting moment, the gavel in his hand felt irrelevant, unable to command the attention of the room, when all eyes were captivated by a toddler and a dog. Officers whispered among themselves, voices low but tinged with awe. "I've never seen anything like this," one said. "The kid. She's fearless," another replied. There was recognition in their tones, a deep understanding that they were witnessing something rare, courage not born of training or experience, but of instinct, purity, and trust. The toddler's words, so simple in their phrasing, carried a weight that no adult instruction could replicate. The audience began to notice subtle details that made the moment even more extraordinary. The girl's hands, delicate and tiny, rested lightly on Rex's massive muzzle, yet she controlled her movements with precision. The dog's body language was equally deliberate, tail wagging slowly, muscles relaxed yet alert, ears perked. It was a silent dialogue, communicated in gestures, glances, and breaths. Every subtle motion added layers of meaning to the scene, and the courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, desperate not to miss a single nuance. Even the reporters, trained to capture events as they happened, felt inadequate. Cameras clicked softly, but no lens could fully capture the intensity of the bond unfolding. Notebooks were scribbled in frenzy, though words on paper could not convey the quiet courage of a child commanding a police dog, or the gentle affirmation of a massive animal responding with care and understanding. This was more than news. It was a human moment, raw and extraordinary. The mother finally allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, tears welling in her eyes. She whispered softly to herself, overwhelmed by the combination of pride, fear, and awe. "My little girl? She's so brave." Her voice, barely audible, carried a depth of emotion that mirrored the courtroom's collective astonishment. She could feel in her chest the gravity of what was happening, and she understood that this moment, innocent, simple, and profound, would be etched into memory forever. The child, sensing the growing attention, did not falter. She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm yet commanding, speaking as if she were the leader of an army rather than a toddler in a courtroom. "You can do it, Rex. Don't let him hurt anyone. Mommy needs you." Her tone carried authority, empathy, and determination, a combination so rare in someone so young that it sent shivers through every adult in the room. Rex shifted slightly, his massive head lowering closer to her, a soft huff escaping his throat. It was not fear nor excitement, but understanding. He was listening, absorbing every word, and responding with subtle gestures that communicated agreement and readiness. The room collectively exhaled, sensing that the unspoken bond between child and dog had reached a peak, a shared understanding that transcended words, training, or age. The judge, finally regaining some composure, cleared his throat and allowed a soft chuckle to escape, a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Well," he said slowly, "it seems we have a new kind of testimony today." The courtroom responded with stifled laughter, not of mockery, but of relief and amazement. The human and canine interaction had broken the rigid formalities, reminding everyone that sometimes the heart spoke louder than the law. As the murmurs and soft gasps filled the room, the child leaned back slightly, still keeping her eyes on Rex. She stroked his fur gently, whispering instructions that no adult could truly comprehend. Every movement, every glance, every word communicated a depth of understanding that defied logic. The courtroom had shifted from a place of formality to a theater of human emotion, where innocence, bravery, and trust took center stage. And in that suspended moment, the entire room understood something fundamental. Courage does not require age, and trust does not require language. The smallest voice, speaking with clarity and purpose, could command the attention and respect of all. The connection between the toddler and Rex was no longer just a curiosity. It had become the heartbeat of the courtroom, the invisible thread holding everyone in shared awe. The first words had been spoken, and their impact was immeasurable. The child had not only captured attention, but had altered the energy of the entire courtroom. Adults leaned forward, hearts racing, realizing that the ordinary rules of authority and experience no longer applied here. The child's bravery, amplified by the dog's gentle acknowledgement, had created a moment that would be remembered far longer than any legal verdict that might follow. The audience waited, breathless, knowing that the story had only just begun. And for the first time that day, everyone present, judge, officers, reporters, and spectators alike, was acutely aware of one undeniable truth. Something extraordinary was unfolding. And no one would ever forget the day a 3-year-old spoke to a police dog and left the entire courtroom silent. The courtroom remained in a strange, suspended silence, as if the usual rhythm of legal proceedings had evaporated entirely. The air was thick with anticipation, tension, and awe. Every person present was aware that they were witnessing something rare, a moment that defied expectation and convention. The small girl, kneeling before Rex, seemed entirely oblivious to the spell she had cast over the room. Her wide brown eyes were fixed on the dog's golden gaze, unwavering, and her tiny hands gently rested on his muzzle. There was an almost imperceptible rhythm to their interaction, a silent dialogue that no one else could fully comprehend. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, breath caught, unsure whether to speak, move, or even blink. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, their carefully crafted arguments forgotten. Reporters froze, pens hovering above notebooks, fingers trembling as cameras captured a scene that words could scarcely describe. The judge, who had spent decades enforcing order and decorum, rested his gavel mid-air, a rare look of astonishment softening his usually stern expression. Even the seasoned police officers, trained for calm in the most chaotic of circumstances, were caught off guard. This was not a performance, not a demonstration, but a genuine and extraordinary interaction between a tiny child and a massive, disciplined police dog. The mother, seated in the front row, felt her heart swell and ache simultaneously. Pride, fear, and awe intermingled in her chest, leaving her breathless. She had watched her daughter grow, learning words, gestures, and the little routines of childhood, but she had never seen her possess such quiet courage. And now, in a room dominated by adults, legal protocols, and rigid authority, her child was commanding attention without even realizing it. The toddler's innocence, combined with her natural fearlessness, had transformed her from a passive observer to the focal point of the entire courtroom. The soft huff of Rex's breath and the slight wag of his tail were the only audible sounds for several moments. These subtle gestures carried enormous meaning. It was as if the dog understood the seriousness of the child's words, acknowledging her intent without needing verbal affirmation. The audience, perceptive enough to notice these minute cues, began to sense the profound depth of their connection. It was more than communication. It was trust, courage, and empathy distilled into a single, extraordinary bond. A ripple of emotion passed through the courtroom. Eyes glistened with tears, hands pressed against mouths in silent astonishment, and hearts pounded with a mix of fear and wonder. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that the scene before them defied conventional understanding. Adults whispered to each other in hushed tones. She's not afraid. It's incredible. Look at the dog. How does a 3-year-old do this? Their voices carried awe, admiration, and a touch of disbelief. The usual barriers of age, authority, and expectation had dissolved in the presence of something pure and unexpected. The officers handling Rex remained alert, but even they were moved. One whispered quietly to a colleague, "I've worked with service dogs for years, but I've never seen one respond like this. It's different." Another nodded, his eyes never leaving the child. "It's like he understands her completely. And she's commanding respect, even from him." Their words reflected the unique power of the moment, a child's courage amplified by the quiet, intelligent responses of a trained police dog. It was a combination that could humble anyone, regardless of experience or authority. The judge, regaining some composure, allowed a soft chuckle to escape. "Well," he said, his voice steady but tinged with wonder, "it appears we have a new type of testimony today." There was laughter in the room, but it was not mockery. It was a release of tension, a collective recognition of the extraordinary nature of what they were witnessing. Even the mother smiled faintly through tears, her pride and relief intertwining in a way she could barely describe. Her daughter had done something remarkable, and the courtroom felt it deeply. Meanwhile, the child continued her interaction with Rex. Her small hands traced gentle patterns along his fur, and she whispered instructions that only he could understand. "You can do it, Rex. Make sure everyone is safe. Don't let him hurt Mommy." Each word was spoken with authority and calm, remarkable for someone so young. Yet it was not harsh or commanding. It was firm, empathetic, and full of intent. Rex responded with subtle movements, shifts of his massive head, the faint wag of his tail, a low, steady huff. These were acknowledgments, gestures that reinforced the mutual understanding between child and dog. The courtroom seemed to lean forward collectively, drawn into the unfolding story. Spectators noticed how the child's words, simple yet precise, seemed to carry weight beyond comprehension. They were witnessing the rare phenomenon of innocence and courage, intersecting with discipline and understanding. The atmosphere was charged with an almost electric intensity, a sense that history, or at least a memorable moment in their own lives, was being made. Even the reporters, tasked with capturing facts, struggled to convey the magnitude of the scene. Cameras clicked softly, trying to immortalize a fleeting connection that words could not fully express. Notes were scribbled frantically, but even the most detailed description could not capture the essence. The child's unwavering gaze, the deliberate gestures of the dog, and the silent power of trust between them. Every observer felt it in their chest, a quiet recognition that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The mother whispered softly to herself, her voice nearly lost in the hushed room. "My brave girl. My little girl?" Her fingers brushed her daughter's hair gently, a protective and proud gesture. She could not articulate the depth of her emotions, pride, awe, fear, relief, and wonder, but they were all present, coiling together like a quiet storm in her chest. Her daughter's bravery was undeniable, and the mother knew that this moment would be remembered forever, not just by her, but by everyone present. The child, aware of no one's attention, remained composed. She leaned slightly closer to Rex, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could comprehend. "Be careful, Rex. Make sure Mommy is safe." The dog responded with a slight nudge of his snout, a silent affirmation. It was a simple gesture, but it carried immense significance. The audience sensed it instantly. This was not just a demonstration of obedience. It was a testament to trust, courage, and empathy. For the first time that day, the entire courtroom felt a shared heartbeat. It was as if all the adults, with their experience, authority, and rationality, were collectively humbled by the purity of the child's bravery and the dog's gentle acknowledgement. This was more than a scene. It was a lesson in courage, communication, and humanity. It reminded everyone present that age, size, or authority mattered little when faced with honesty, bravery, and trust. Minutes passed, but no one dared interrupt. Lawyers, officers, reporters, and families alike remained transfixed, caught in a moment that transcended words. The usual pace of legal proceedings seemed irrelevant. The gavel, papers, and procedural rituals faded into the background, eclipsed by the extraordinary bond unfolding before them. Every subtle movement, the tilt of the dog's head, the whisper of the child's voice, the gentle wag of his tail, was magnified in importance. And then, slowly, a quiet realization spread through the courtroom. This was a moment that would never be forgotten. The child had captured attention, commanded respect, and elicited a response from a creature trained for discipline and authority. In doing so, she reminded every adult present that courage, empathy, and understanding could transcend age and experience. A silent courtroom was not merely observing, they were witnessing something profound, a connection that spoke to the very heart of human and animal understanding. The mother exhaled deeply, tears slipping down her cheeks. She glanced at the officer kneeling beside Rex and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for letting her do this." The officer, his expression a mixture of awe and respect, nodded subtly. "She's remarkable," he replied softly. "And he? He understands her. Completely." Their words reflected the unspoken truth in the room. Moments like this were rare, and they were all witnesses to a miracle of courage, trust, and connection. As the courtroom remained silent, the child continued her soft whispers, her small hands on Rex's fur, her words gentle yet filled with intent. Everyone present was captivated, not by spectacle, but by authenticity. It was a profound reminder that sometimes the smallest voices could carry the greatest weight, and that courage was not measured in years or size, but in the purity of heart and intent. The courtroom, once a place of order, rules, and measured procedure, had become something entirely different, a theater of raw emotion, empathy, and awe. The small girl remained kneeling before Rex, the massive police dog whose golden eyes reflected understanding and calm. Every gesture of hers, every whispered word, resonated with the room in ways that no adult conversation or legal argument could. The spectators, lawyers, officers, and even the judge felt it deeply. The child's innocence and bravery had pierced the formal, stoic walls of the courthouse, replacing them with something profoundly human. Murmurs filled the room, hushed but filled with astonishment. Spectators leaned forward, their hands gripping the edges of benches, hearts pounding as if they were part of the unfolding miracle themselves. "Can you believe this?" One whispered, her voice trembling. "She's so small, yet she's so courageous." Another replied softly, "And Rex? He's responding. He understands her completely." There was a shared acknowledgement in the room. This was not a performance, not a staged display. It was real, alive, and extraordinary in its authenticity. The mother, seated in the front row, could barely contain the torrent of emotions coursing through her. Pride, fear, awe, and relief intertwined, forming a mixture so intense that it made her chest ache. She had always known her daughter was brave in small, everyday ways, but this was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. Her child, barely 3 years old, had commanded the attention and respect of everyone present, including trained officers, experienced lawyers, and a massive police dog. She felt tears prickle her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of pride, amazement, and an overwhelming love that seemed to expand her chest. The officers, normally trained to control chaos and maintain calm, were visibly moved. They whispered among themselves, their voices low but tinged with awe. "I've worked with service dogs for years," one murmured, his eyes never leaving the girl, "but I've never seen one respond like this. It's different." Another nodded, adding, "It's like he understands her completely. And she's commanding respect, even from him." Their words reflected not only surprise, but also admiration. They recognized a rare moment of genuine courage and trust, a moment that transcended training, procedure, and authority. Even the judge, whose face usually bore a mask of neutrality, softened. His stern features relaxed, and his eyes glistened with a mixture of emotion and wonder. He rested his hands lightly on the gavel, no longer a symbol of authority, but an observer of a remarkable human experience. The courtroom, previously rigid with structure and routine, had become a space for connection, empathy, and the recognition of courage in its purest form. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "I've never seen anything like this." "Never." The child continued to interact with Rex, speaking softly, but with purpose. "Make sure Mommy is safe," she said, her voice calm, yet filled with determination. Her hands traced gentle patterns along his thick fur, and she tilted her head, as if listening to his subtle responses. Rex, in turn, leaned slightly closer, his massive head lowering in acknowledgement. His tail wagged slowly, deliberately, communicating reassurance. It was a silent conversation, a dance of trust and understanding that captivated the audience even further. Observers could not help but feel the emotional weight of the scene. The connection between child and dog highlighted something deeply human, the innate ability to communicate and trust across barriers of size, experience, and even species. It reminded everyone present that courage did not require age or stature, and that bravery often manifested in the most unexpected forms. Witnessing such pure, unfiltered interaction left a mark on every soul in the room. Reporters, who had arrived to document a routine courtroom procedure, were overwhelmed. Cameras clicked softly, but the flashes felt almost intrusive in the tender moment unfolding before them. Notes were scribbled feverishly, but the words on paper could not capture the gravity of the experience, the silent strength of a 3-year-old, the gentle acknowledgement of a police dog, and the collective awe of the courtroom. One reporter whispered to a colleague, "This isn't news. It's something bigger. It's humanity." Even the children present in the audience were mesmerized. Young eyes widened as they watched the tiny girl command attention and respect in a room filled with adults. They leaned forward, silent, absorbing the courage, empathy, and trust displayed before them. For them, it was not just a story. It was a lesson in bravery, innocence, and the power of connection. One little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, "Mom, I want to be like her when I grow up." His mother smiled, holding back tears, realizing that her son had just witnessed a life-changing example of courage and trust. The mother, still holding back tears, whispered encouragement to her daughter. "You're doing amazing, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice trembling. Her daughter glanced at her briefly, nodding ever so slightly. Before returning her attention to Rex, there was no fear in the child's eyes. Only a quiet determination, a belief in the goodness of her companion and the safety he could provide. The mother's heart swelled with pride. She knew that her daughter's courage and empathy would resonate far beyond this courtroom, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who witnessed it. The officers, reporters, and spectators collectively held their breath as the child continued to communicate with Rex. Her soft whispers, gentle touches, and unwavering gaze created a rhythm that everyone in the room felt. It was a dance of trust and bravery, an interplay between innocence and discipline that left no one untouched. The room was alive with emotion, a shared heartbeat connecting every person to the extraordinary bond unfolding before them. Even the judge, who prided himself on impartiality and focus, felt a tear escape. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and allowed a rare, soft smile to cross his face. This was no longer a courtroom proceeding. It had become a story of courage, empathy, and connection. The formalities of law, the procedures, the weighty arguments, all of it faded into the background, replaced by the extraordinary moment of a child, a dog, and the profound silence that had captured everyone's heart. Time seemed to stretch and bend as the child and Rex continued their interaction. Every movement, every word, every subtle gesture resonated with emotional intensity. The audience remained transfixed, unwilling to look away or interrupt. They understood, without being told, that this was a rare and precious moment, a demonstration of bravery, trust, and the remarkable power of innocence. Adults were humbled. Children were inspired. The room was unified by a shared sense of awe. The mother exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by the experience. She whispered once more, "My brave girl, you're amazing." Her eyes shimmered with tears, her hands gripping the arms of her chair tightly. She understood, as everyone did, that her daughter had done something remarkable, She had captured attention, commanded respect, and reminded everyone present of the profound impact of courage and empathy. The officers, witnesses, and spectators sat in quiet reflection. Some whispered softly, some wept silently, and some simply stared, absorbing the emotional resonance of the scene. A courtroom had become more than a place of law. It was a space of connection, bravery, and humanity. Everyone present was forever changed by the small girl who had spoken with unwavering courage to a police dog, leaving the entire room captivated and moved beyond words. In that moment, it became clear. This story would not be forgotten. The courage of the child, the gentle response of Rex, and the collective awe of the courtroom had created a memory that would linger in hearts and minds for years. It was a reminder that bravery could come in any form, that trust could cross all boundaries, and that innocence could illuminate the world in ways no adult authority could replicate. The courtroom remained bathed in an almost sacred silence. The usual rhythm of proceedings, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of whispers, the occasional cough had faded into a profound stillness. Every eye was fixed on the small girl and Rex, who maintained their extraordinary connection. The child, kneeling on the polished floor, continued her gentle, deliberate interaction with the police dog. Her soft words, though quiet, carried clarity and authority that resonated far beyond her tiny voice. The audience could feel them, as if the room itself were attuned to the extraordinary bond unfolding before them. The judge, seated at the bench, leaned forward. His hands rested lightly on the polished wood, and his usually stoic face softened. He cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention, yet even then, his words seemed secondary to the emotional resonance of the moment. "Order in the court," he said, his voice calm but carrying warmth. The command was familiar, but its usual authority felt diminished, tempered by the wonder of what had transpired. For decades, he had presided over countless cases, but nothing had prepared him for this, an interaction so simple, yet profoundly moving, that it left every adult in the room suspended between awe and disbelief. He paused, letting the gravity of the scene sink in. His eyes lingered on the girl, who was now stroking Rex's fur with quiet precision. "Sometimes," he continued, "the smallest among us remind the rest of us what courage truly looks like." The words, simple yet poignant, were met with a collective intake of breath. Spectators felt a shiver run down their spines. The judge's acknowledgement was not a mere formality. It was a recognition of bravery, empathy, and an unspoken understanding that transcended years, authority, and size. The audience responded subtly, a mix of nods, whispered exclamations, and soft, awed murmurs. Even the officers, trained to remain composed under pressure, felt a strange warmth, a collective sense of appreciation and admiration. They exchanged glances, realizing that this was more than a child speaking to a dog. It was a reminder of the human spirit, courage untainted by fear, and trust unbound by experience. Every person present was touched, united by the extraordinary moment unfolding before them. The mother, seated in the front row, felt a swell of pride so intense that it nearly overwhelmed her. She pressed a hand to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered softly to herself, "My brave girl, my little girl." Her voice was barely audible, yet the emotion in it filled the space. She watched her daughter interact with Rex, marveling at the clarity, calm, and courage her child displayed. Every gesture, every word, every subtle glance communicated strength far beyond her age. Rex responded as if in understanding, nudging the child gently with his snout, his massive head lowering slightly in acknowledgement. The dog's calm, deliberate movements reflected intelligence, empathy, and discipline. Every subtle motion carried meaning, resonating with the audience who could perceive the depth of the bond. It was a silent affirmation, The dog trusted the child, and the child trusted the dog. This mutual respect had captivated everyone, human and animal alike, creating a moment that transcended routine courtroom proceedings. The judge continued, his voice steady, imbued with sincerity. This courtroom, filled with procedure, rules, and authority, is a place where logic and order often dominate. Yet today, we are reminded that courage, trust, and empathy do not require years of experience or training. They can come from the youngest and smallest among us. His gaze swept over the spectators, officers, and reporters who sat transfixed. We are witnessing a lesson that no book, law, or lecture could teach, a lesson in humanity, bravery, and the quiet power of innocence. Soft murmurs of agreement traveled through the room. Spectators exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting tears, awe, and inspiration. The officers, still kneeling or standing near Rex, nodded subtly. Even the reporters, tasked with capturing facts, found themselves emotionally disarmed, realizing that the story they were documenting was far greater than any legal proceeding. It was a story of connection, courage, and empathy that transcended conventional boundaries. The child, sensing the room's attention, continued her gentle interaction. She whispered softly, words that seemed meant only for Rex's ears. "Keep Mommy safe. Make sure no one gets hurt." Her tone was calm yet filled with conviction, and her hands traced the dog's fur with delicate precision. Rex's responses were equally subtle, but full of meaning. A shift of his massive head, a slow wag of his tail, a soft huff that spoke volumes. Every movement communicated understanding, trust, and readiness. The judge watched intently, appreciating the depth of the moment. "I hope everyone here recognizes what we are witnessing," he said. "It is a reminder that courage does not depend on size, age, or position. Bravery can come in the smallest package. Trust can cross boundaries we never imagined. And innocence, when paired with courage, has the power to capture hearts, influence decisions, and inspire change." His words lingered, resonating in the hearts of every person present. Spectators and officers alike felt an almost spiritual connection to the scene. The energy in the courtroom had shifted from formality and routine to awe, reverence, and emotional intensity. Conversations in hushed whispers reflected astonishment and admiration. "I've never seen anything like this," one officer murmured. "She's remarkable." Another nodded, his eyes moist, whispering, "And he? He's responding to her. Completely." The realization spread. This was not just a moment of childlike innocence, but a profound testament to trust and courage that could move even the most seasoned adults. A mother, her hands trembling, leaned closer to the child. "You're amazing," she whispered softly, her voice thick with emotion. The child looked up briefly, her gaze steady and calm, then returned her attention to Rex. There was no fear, no hesitation, only determination, and a quiet understanding of responsibility. She was unaware of the impact she had made, yet the courtroom could feel it in every breath, every heartbeat, every glance exchanged between human and dog. Even the reporters, who had arrived expecting a routine court session, were transformed into witnesses of something extraordinary. Cameras clicked softly, capturing moments that words could scarcely convey. Notebooks were filled with hurried scribbles, yet no description could fully communicate the subtlety, courage, and emotional resonance of the scene. One reporter whispered to a colleague, voice shaking, "This isn't just a story. It's a lesson in humanity. Something bigger than any headline." Time seemed to stretch as the child continued her quiet communication with Rex. Every movement, her gentle touch, his subtle nod, their synchronized breathing held the room captive. The audience could almost feel the unspoken understanding, the trust, and the courage flowing between them. It was a moment that transcended age, species, and authority, a testament to the purest form of connection and bravery. The judge, finally allowing himself a small smile, leaned back in his chair. "Let this courtroom remember today," he said softly. "A day when innocence, courage, and trust reminded us all of the humanity we sometimes forget in the routine of our lives. A 3-year-old girl and a police dog have shown us something timeless and profound. And that, perhaps, is a lesson far more important than any ruling I could issue." The courtroom exhaled collectively. The emotional weight of his words, combined with the extraordinary interaction between child and dog, left an indelible mark. Officers, spectators, reporters, and even children in the audience felt changed, inspired, and humbled. They had witnessed bravery, trust, and empathy in its purest form, and the impact of that moment would resonate long after they left the courthouse. And as the mother brushed a tear from her cheek, and the child whispered once more to Rex, the room remained suspended in awe. The judge, officers, and spectators alike understood that this was no ordinary day in court. It was a day that would be remembered as a testament to courage, innocence, and the quiet power of connection. The story, they all knew, was just beginning to ripple outward beyond the walls of that courtroom. By the time the small girl and Rex rose from the courtroom floor, the story had already begun to ripple outward. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras clicked incessantly, and the courtroom audience buzzed with hushed conversation. Witnesses whispered in disbelief, recounting every detail to those around them. Social media feeds were soon flooded with accounts of the extraordinary event. 3-year-olds speaking directly to a police dog in court, commanding attention and leaving every adult present captivated and silent. The story transcended typical courtroom news. It became a viral phenomenon almost instantly. The mother, holding her daughter's hand, stepped carefully down the polished steps of the courthouse. She noticed neighbors and local community members waiting outside, eager to glimpse the child who had captured the hearts of so many. The little girl, still clutching her worn stuffed bear, waved shyly to the crowd, her eyes wide and innocent. For her, the attention was new but not intimidating. She had faced a room full of adults and a massive police dog with calm courage, and this moment felt like just another part of the day. Officers who had accompanied Rex stood nearby, answering questions with measured calm. They were amazed by the reactions themselves, realizing that what they had witnessed, though extraordinary in their professional experience, was now sparking awe and admiration in the wider community. "I've never seen anything like this in all my years," one officer said quietly to a colleague. The way she communicated, it wasn't just words. It was courage and trust. That dog responded to her in ways I'd never seen before. His colleague nodded solemnly, fully understanding the gravity of what had unfolded. The media descended quickly. Local news vans lined the courthouse steps, microphones extended toward the mother and daughter. Reporters asked questions in rapid succession, voices blending into a whirlwind of curiosity and urgency. "Can you tell us what was going through her mind?" one reporter asked. "How did she know how to speak to Rex?" Another added. The mother smiled gently, a mixture of pride, awe, and exhaustion crossing her features. "She's always had a natural bravery," she said softly. "I don't think she realized how many people were watching. She was just herself." Photographers snapped images of the child beside Rex, capturing moments of gentle interaction, her tiny fingers brushing his fur, his massive head tilted slightly in acknowledgement. The quiet connection between them that had stunned everyone in the courtroom. The photos quickly spread online, accompanied by headlines celebrating the child's courage. 3-year-old captivates courtroom and police dog ran across screens nationwide. Social media feeds filled with clips, photos, and live updates, and soon, the story reached people who had no connection to the town, but were drawn to the universal themes of bravery, innocence, and empathy. The community, inspired by the tale, reacted in ways both large and small. Local schools incorporated the story into lessons about courage and responsibility, teachers explaining how bravery is not defined by age or size. Children in classrooms discussed the little girl and her dog, imagining what they would do in her place. Neighborhoods shared stories, holding informal discussions and even small gatherings to celebrate the extraordinary act of a 3-year-old who had reminded everyone of the quiet power of courage. News outlets interviewed the officers, capturing their astonishment and admiration. "I've worked with service dogs for over a decade," one officer said, "but I've never witnessed anything like this." That child had authority, empathy, and confidence, and Rex, he understood her completely. It was something none of us will forget. Another officer added, "It reminded us all why we do what we do." Courage isn't just in officers or trained dogs, it's in everyday people, even the youngest among us. Their testimony gave the story both depth and legitimacy, reinforcing the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. The story soon reached national coverage. Social media users from across the country shared the images and clips of the courtroom moment, praising the little girl for her bravery and commending Rex for his calm, understanding presence. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Hashtag brave little girl, hashtag Rex the hero, hashtag courtroom courage. People commented with personal anecdotes, sharing moments when their children or pets had demonstrated unexpected bravery or empathy. The story became more than a courtroom anecdote. It became a symbol of innocence, courage, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. Meanwhile, the mother and daughter, despite the growing attention, remained grounded. The little girl, unaware of the viral sensation, focused on her stuffed bear and Rex. She patted his fur gently, whispering instructions in the same calm, deliberate tone she had used in the courtroom. Her mother watched, smiling softly, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and humility. She understood that her daughter's bravery and empathy had inspired countless people, yet she knew the child was simply being herself, courageous, empathetic, and innocent. Community leaders and local officials soon acknowledged the story, praising the child's bravery and the remarkable interaction with the police dog. They held informal gatherings to honor both the little girl and Rex, celebrating the bond that had left an entire courtroom in awe. The story inspired programs emphasizing the importance of teaching empathy and courage from a young age, demonstrating how one small act could resonate far beyond its immediate context. Even outside the town, reactions poured in. Social media users, journalists, and ordinary citizens shared their amazement, drawing parallels to their own lives. Many reflected on the importance of courage, trust, and empathy, realizing that heroism could take many forms. A 3-year-old speaking to a police dog in a courtroom became a universal symbol, proof that bravery is not measured by age or size, but by intent and heart. As the story spread, the child and Rex became symbols of hope and inspiration. Schools, news outlets, social media, and neighborhoods discussed the event, not only as a marvel of courage, but as a lesson in humanity. The courtroom that had once been filled with procedural formality was now immortalized in public memory as the setting where a tiny girl reminded everyone of the quiet power of trust, bravery, and empathy. For the mother, the most profound aspect was not the attention or recognition. It was the knowledge that her daughter had acted from genuine compassion and bravery. She wasn't performing for anyone, she said to a local reporter. She was just being herself, and somehow, that's inspired people far beyond what I could have imagined. She held her daughter close, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and felt the extraordinary weight and beauty of the day settle into her heart. Rex, too, received recognition. A massive police dog had demonstrated patience, intelligence, and empathy, reinforcing the bond that had captured so many hearts. Trainers and officers praised him for his calm response, noting that, while he was trained to act under command, the subtle understanding he displayed went beyond training. It was instinct, trust, and connection. The pair, child and dog, had created a story that was timeless, reminding everyone that courage and compassion often exist in the quietest, simplest actions. By the end of the week, the story had transcended the town, the courtroom, and the courthouse steps. News reports, viral clips, and social media posts spread across the nation. Children discussed the tale in schools, parents shared it with friends, and communities celebrated it as an example of courage and trust. The 3-year-old and Rex had become more than participants in a courtroom event. They had become symbols of bravery, empathy, and the extraordinary power of connection. And as the mother held her daughter's hand, and Rex's calm gaze met theirs, the room, the town, and the wider community recognized something undeniable. A small voice, combined with trust and courage, could inspire a world far larger than itself. Weeks had passed since the extraordinary courtroom event, but the memory of that day lingered vividly in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. The small town was still abuzz with stories about the 3-year-old girl and Rex, the police dog whose calm, intelligent responses had captivated an entire courtroom. Locals still spoke of the day when innocence, courage, and empathy had combined to create a moment that transcended law and authority, a story that would ripple far beyond the courthouse walls. The child, meanwhile, had returned to the simplicity of daily life. To her, the courtroom was a place of responsibility, not spectacle. She played with her stuffed bear, attended preschool, and laughed with friends without a thought of fame or recognition. Yet she carried with her an unspoken understanding of bravery and empathy, lessons learned not from stories or instructions, but from the quiet, extraordinary act of standing fearless in front of a massive dog, trusting in the bond between them. Her mother watched, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude, knowing that this small child had taught the entire community a lesson that could not be measured or quantified. Rex, too, continued his work with the police force, but his relationship with the child remained special. Officers would recount moments when the dog's behavior seemed unusually gentle and attentive around her, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and connection they had shared in the courtroom. This bond became a point of inspiration for the police department. Trainers spoke of Rex's patience and intelligence, noting that his response to a 3-year-old demonstrated a remarkable depth of understanding. In many ways, the dog and the child had become ambassadors of trust, courage, and the subtle power of connection. The courthouse itself, usually a place of solemnity and order, had become a symbol of an unforgettable moment. Visitors and locals alike would occasionally reference the day when the courtroom had fallen silent, not because of fear or tension, but because of awe and wonder. The story had become a quiet legend, shared over coffee tables, in school hallways, and during neighborhood gatherings. It reminded people that courage is not measured by age or size, and that empathy can create bridges in the most unexpected ways. Media outlets continued to highlight the event, emphasizing its impact on both the child and the broader community. News segments recounted the courtroom drama, showing clips of the girl kneeling before Rex, whispering instructions with calm authority, and the dog responding with subtle yet profound gestures. Journalists described how the event had inspired children, parents and officers alike, framing it not as a mere anecdote, but as a moment of universal significance. Social media continued to share the story widely, with people reflecting on the lessons of courage, empathy, and connection it conveyed. Schools used the story as a teaching tool, emphasizing qualities that transcended academic learning. Teachers spoke to children about bravery, not as a measure of physical strength or age, but as the courage to act rightly, even in unexpected circumstances. Lessons on empathy highlighted the importance of understanding others, whether human or animal. Children were encouraged to communicate, trust, and act with kindness, inspired by the real-life example of a small girl whose words and actions had resonated far beyond her age. Community leaders organized informal gatherings to celebrate the bravery and courage exemplified by the child and Rex. Families shared stories, discussed the significance of trust, and reflected on the simplicity yet profundity of courage. The event became an emblem of hope, a reminder that even small voices could be heard and could inspire change. Local police departments used it as a teaching story for officers, emphasizing patience, understanding, and the impact of trust between humans and animals. The mother continued to marvel at her daughter's quiet strength. She often reflected on the day in the courtroom, remembering the way her child had faced a room full of adults and a massive, disciplined police dog with calm authority. "She's taught me more than I could have ever imagined," the mother confided to friends. In her small hands, she carried courage, empathy, and trust. And she reminded all of us how powerful innocence can be. She watched as her daughter grew, confident yet gentle, brave yet compassionate, and she felt gratitude for the lessons that extended beyond herself, touching the lives of everyone who had witnessed that remarkable day. The police department acknowledged Rex's role, praising his intelligence, patience, and calm response. Officers spoke about the importance of understanding and empathy in their work, noting that the bond between the dog and the child had inspired them to reflect on the human side of their duties. Rex, in turn, became a quiet hero in the community, admired not only for his skills as a police dog, but for the gentle understanding he displayed toward the child, who had trusted him completely. In the following months, the story continued to inspire people across the country. Letters poured in from families, children, and law enforcement officers, thanking the child and Rex for reminding them of the importance of courage, empathy, and trust. Some shared stories of their own children displaying unexpected bravery. Others recounted moments when their pets had responded in ways that mirrored the connection between the girl and Rex. The narrative transcended the courtroom, becoming a symbol of hope, trust, and the extraordinary power of human and animal bonds. Even as time passed, the day remained etched in the memories of everyone present. Spectators who had attended the courtroom hearing spoke of it with reverence, recalling the silence that had fallen when a 3-year-old spoke to a police dog. Officers recounted it to new trainees, emphasizing patience, empathy, and the unexpected power of bravery. The judge, too, remembered the day as one of the most remarkable moments in his long career, a day when the law and humanity intersected in a way that left an indelible mark on everyone's heart. Years later, the story of the little girl and Rex continued to inspire. It was shared in books, articles, and documentaries, highlighting extraordinary acts of courage and empathy. Children learned from it, adults reflected upon it, and communities celebrated it as an example of how even the smallest among us can make a profound difference. The lessons were timeless. Courage is not measured by size or age. Trust can bridge worlds, and the simplest acts of bravery can create ripples far beyond what anyone could anticipate. And through it all, the child grew, carrying with her the quiet confidence and compassion that had captivated a courtroom and inspired a community. Rex remained a steady presence, a symbol of loyalty, understanding, and the gentle power of connection. Together, they had created a story that endured, a reminder that courage, empathy, and trust, when combined, could leave an indelible mark on the world. As the mother watched her daughter play in the backyard, laughing with friends and occasionally glancing at Rex lying patiently nearby, she felt a sense of awe and gratitude. The courtroom had been a fleeting moment in time, but its lessons, its courage, and its quiet inspiration would last forever. The story of the 3-year-old and the police dog was not just a tale of bravery, was a testament to the enduring power of trust, connection, and the extraordinary ways that even the smallest voices can be heard. And so, the story concluded not with the final gavel or the closing arguments of a court case, but with something far more lasting: a community inspired, a child emboldened, a dog acknowledged, and a world reminded that bravery and empathy are not measured by age or size, but by the courage of the heart. That day, the courtroom had fallen silent, but the echoes of courage and trust would resound forever.